Ladies and gentlemen, as we experience our first proper democratic transition, we need civil society to ensure that we stay on the right track and not falter in our attempts to carve an accountable and transparent Malaysia. The elected coalition, My Government of Pakatan Harapan, is tasked to carry out the political will of the people, a will that is best judged and keenly observed by organizations, civil society such as C4. My little contribution in this event today is both a privilege and a reminder that we have to be always critical and build on policies to ensure a more transparent representation of the new Malaysia. I am sure that other distinguished speakers will contribute to this mutual benefit. Saudara serta saudari sekalian, Malaysia is often described as an economy that is run on rent-seeking. Political patronage and corruption is endemic. Malaysia is the home of the 1MDB scandal, the largest kleptocratic scandal in the world today. This scandal brought down the previous government, and it serves as an ominous warning to the current one. My involvement in politics has given me a front row seat, a view of the political shenanigans that was happening around Malaysia. After years of fighting from the opposition bench, we now find ourselves in government. Do we now hold ourselves to the same standards that we claim were flaunted by our political opponents? It was easy to be critical when we did not have to face up to the consequences of our words. Now that Pakatan Harapan is in power, we must ensure that we do not fall on our own hypocrisy. Today, I would like to share with you some of my thoughts and experiences during my political journey. I'm sure today's panel will provide us with some insights in their respective areas of expertise. With constant reminders and continuous engagements, we can and must improve the ethical standards and benchmark for anti-corruption activities. Of course, there is no silver bullet that will immediately cure all our ailments, but joint efforts by concerned stakeholders do and can eliminate corruption. Granted, as legislators, we are duty-bound, and each of us took an oath to be honest and transparent in our discharging our duties. But we do need democratic and transparent institutions to be developed securely in place to ensure that these vows that we make as MPs are kept. Although the rules remain the same whether one is in government or in opposition, the reality can be quite different. To reiterate, the true test is whether we are able to hold ourselves to the same standards we claim to uphold now that we are in power. Once the euphoria dust of May 9 settles, the task of creating a new Malaysia becomes more apparent and pressing. It is my responsibility and wish to hold true to the spirit of the Pakatan Harapan Manifesto. Hence my resignation from the appointments to the boards of Penang State GMCs, namely the Penang Development Corporation. I initially accepted this position in the spirit of trying to serve Penang, my state. However, as national debates developed, I reflected on my situation and asked if I was part of the problem or part of the solution. For me, there's only one choice with regards to that, which is to choose the right path of resigning. Relinquishing these positions have allowed me to truly concentrate on two key areas: projects for my constituency of Pakatan Harapan and to raise awareness on national issues that are particularly close to my heart. On the former, we have successfully launched a number of initiatives which are beginning to bear fruit, including a harm reduction program for drug addicts, women empowerment and entrepreneurship program, as well as pushing for efforts to reform the existing prison system. On my duties as an MP, and in this respect, anti-corruption activities, we have to strengthen the legislative process. I believe that by having a more accountable executive, supported by equally strong, active legislative backbench, will be ideal for Malaysia. Ideally, the latter cannot be subservient to the agenda set by the former. That would give the executive excessive, unchecked powers. As such, one of my main reform agendas is to ensure Parliament is upgraded into a fully fledged body that makes full use of standing committees to ensure oversight over the executive. Furthermore, I believe the role of the opposition must be allowed to flourish in the legislative wing. The voices of those elected opposition MPs must be accorded fair equal treatment and be heard in the House. There is also a requirement that the opposition MPs be given the same funding as we get. In the UK Parliament, for example, the expensive reach of the Parliament standing committees ensures ministries and other executive bodies are properly supervised. Standing committees exist to examine and make accountable the duties and works performed by the ministries. These standing committees shadow ministerial responsibilities and ensure sufficient checks and balances, acting as a bulwark against excesses, abuses of power and transgression. Here in Malaysia, we have barely tested the waters of the full potential of the parliament to champion reforms and democracy. Expanding and empowering standing committees consisting of members from both sides of the political divide is a step forward in the right direction. It was with this thinking in mind that I recently joined Wong Chen to serve as a member of the Public Accounts Committee. The PAC members comprise of bipartisan MPs responsible for scrutinizing the accounts and spending of the federal government. Ministries and public authorities have a grave duty ahead. Such independent bodies such as the PAC are key to ensuring transparency and integrity in the government expenditure. Standing committees allow us to keep a close eye on the workings of government, ready to question any abuses of power. The Pakatan Harapan manifesto promises to accord the chairmanship of the PAC to a member of the opposition. This was done, but current political dynamics may change that very soon. As you know, the current PAC chairman, my good friend, By Wong Chen from Buruan, has left UMNO a couple of months ago, his original party, and now is an independent, PH-friendly member of parliament. But recently he has also submitted an application to be a Bersatu member of parliament. Now I want to move on to institutional change and reform. As a lawmaker, one of the issues I noticed firsthand is the limitation of our government institutions when it comes to fairness and transparency. Establishing strong, trustworthy institutions is crucial to a functional democracy that is free of corruption. According to the National Anti-Corruption Plan 2019, lawmakers and government officials rank high on the public's list of individuals believed to be corrupt. This perception is there for a reason. It is not a statistical aberration. As such, a lot needs to be done to restore public confidence in politicians and in institutions. Without proper separation of powers, institutions with weak governance will breed corruption. The cure to this illness is the democratization of our institutions, diffusing power of the cabinet and the prime minister, and then spreading it fairly to the other elected representatives through the standing committees. Taking on the role of the main legislative body, Parliament is supposed to enact, amend and repeal laws, approve national budget, provide policy direction, and ensure accountability of the executive. However, this is not the case in the so-called New Malaysia yet. Over decades, political and financial powers were consolidated and centralized in the executive, particularly in the Prime Minister's office. Consequently, laws tend to be dictated from the executive branch, with Parliament largely acting as an approval body, with cursory debates and rubber stamping, ultimately. Legislative powers of Parliament were minimized due to the lack of resources, changes in rules, and as such, bills are never carried out by members, private members, but exclusively by the executive. This is an unhealthy practice where the MPs only vote on legislation that were created and promoted by the executive. The legislative process is also weakened by the lack of checks and balances from Dewan Negara, the upper house. If the Dewan Negara votes against any legislation, it can only delay the passage of the bill by 1 month to a year, depending on circumstances. In the United Kingdom, members of Parliament are empowered and encouraged to push forward private members' bills. In Malaysia, however, bills are effectively only ever introduced by the ministers, and private member bills are never ever given the space and time, except for the included bill that was read but not tabled. With a committee formed to consider legislation, including issues regarding private members' bill, there is a new hope, and this was created somewhere in December, at the early stages of December, that's my idea. There is a new hope that Malaysian MPs can finally have the support needed, the logistical support, the resources support to push forward reforms on legislation. It is now a fact that the PH government has been extremely slow to introduce legislative reforms. Thus, it is imperative that we now begin more discussions on how we must pursue and put in practice the principle of separation of powers for Malaysia. Parliament must have more power and resources to lead the legislative process as opposed to the passive voice it currently plays. The Dewan Negara should also be given veto power instead of mere powers to delay. On top of that, there is a need for transparency and accountability on the appointments of senators, as over half, in fact 63%, or 44 out of 70 senators are appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister. This current practice gives supreme constitutional power to the Prime Minister alone. It is worthwhile to note Senator Yusmati Yusof's efforts on Senate Reform Working Committee, looking on how to restructure the Malaysians of the House. On a separate note, we in the backbench, I will explain this a bit later, together with the Speaker, are also pursuing massive, deep reforms on parliamentary policy. Now, I would like to draw the attention to one final topic, and that of political appointees. I'm not going to dwell too much on this topic, as Professor Terence Gomez is here today. And I'm sure that he will be able to enlighten most of us more than I can ever contribute to this subject matter. I will, however, reaffirm this commitment. As a cornerstone pledge of Pakatan Harapan, we must stop the practice of political appointments. We must hold ourselves to a higher standard, and we must do better. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, in a couple of months, the government of the new Malaysia will be 1 year old. While I urge caution on passing judgment too quickly on Pakatan Harapan's performance thus far, as we have a long way yet to go, we must also be constantly vigilant and be brave to cry foul when obvious transgressions occur. Your participation at this event here today is demonstrative of how strongly we, as a group of concerned citizens, feel about eliminating corruption. Discussions such as the one we are having today are absolutely necessary. We must continue our noble efforts against abuses of power and corruption. Last year's general election taught us that the rakyat matters most. Let us not forget that lesson. Let us continue to make reality that this vision of a new Malaysia, fair, free from all forms of bigotry, free from corruption, and based on social justice. We all desire a better Malaysia, and we must work together, being mindful of each other to make it really happen. There may not be an immediate, easy solution to solve corruption, but we must all do our bit to tackle this issue in our various capabilities and capacities. I want to congratulate C4 for continuing this difficult task to eliminate political patronage and corruption here. I look forward to the recommendations presented here today in this forum. Thank you very much.